Hello, everyone. David Hill here with Vestrite. So, what I wanted to do today is walk you through a typical residential development timeline. And one thing to keep in mind here is that this word typical right here, it's very important because we're looking at maybe what we can call an average timeline. But there's nothing typical about residential land development, and every timeline can be different. You can have some projects that will take shorter, some will take much longer. So today what we want to accomplish is just to take a look at maybe your average or typical timeline. Another thing to keep in mind is that in each of these steps that we're going to talk about, we will be talking in general terms. So I'm not going to get into defining exactly what all of these things are and what they mean and breaking them down. But rest assured that in our course, we do get into that. We get into that in depth and explain what all of these mean. But for now, really the goal here is just to look at the typical development timeline and get a good understanding or feel for what that looks like. All right, so let's jump in. So we're going to start off with this brown rectangle here, which represents a piece of property, just a piece of raw dirt. Maybe it's a 10-acre parcel. It is, but nothing has been done to it. Nothing has been divided. There's been no approvals on this project. It's just a piece of raw dirt. Well, the average developer will come in and do what we call a feasibility study. Sometimes that's called a due diligence study. And the timeline for this feasibility study, it will vary by market and by project. Here in the Northwest, we typically see our feasibility studies last around 90 days. Some parts of the country, they get stretched out to 120. We've seen other parts where it dials down to around 60, but we'll just call it 90 days to kind of keep it average. The next thing that we need to do, well, let's talk about this feasibility study. First of all, the feasibility study is extremely important, and it is a developer's time to basically come in and do some studies to make sure this project is feasible. Remember, when we start, we just have a piece of raw dirt, and we might have some ideas of what we can do with it based on the zoning and a lot of different things that we teach you about in our course, but the developer will have an idea of what he or she can do with this raw dirt, and the feasibility study is a crucial time for that developer to be able to prove to himself that, yep, what I wanted to do with it from the beginning is something I'm going to be able to actually do. So in that feasibility study, the developer will go through a checklist of items and he will knock each of those items off on that checklist to get a certain level of comfort that yes, his original plan of what he can do with the raw dirt is feasible. And again, that takes about 90 days. All right, on to the next step. The next step is to start preparing the land use application. So the developer goes through his feasibility study, and I'm just going to say his instead of saying his, her each time. We'll just default to the male, even though there's absolutely no reason why women can't do this. I just want to make sure I make that clear. But I just don't want to start saying his or her over and over again. So we'll default to his. But that is actually one little message I'll put out there is that women can absolutely do what we teach and practice our methods. So ladies out there, this is for you just as much as it is for the guys out there. All right, so the developer goes through the feasibility study. He goes through his checklist and he decides, yep, I like this project. I'm going to move forward. And the next thing he'll start doing is he'll have his engineer start preparing the land use application. And that's an application that he is going to submit to whatever jurisdiction is in charge of this piece of property. So typically that'll either be a city or a county. And on average, we can say that it'll take around 60 days for his engineering firm to prepare this land use application. The next thing that's going to happen is that the developer is going to submit that land use application to the jurisdiction. So let's just say in this example, he submits it to the city. And the city, once they get that application, they typically will go through what's called a process of deeming the application complete, meaning that they're going to go through the application and look through all the pages of it, and usually there are hundreds of pages in these applications, and they're just going to make a determination of whether or not they have everything they need in this application in order to make their decision of whether or not to approve the project. So 30 days is to get an application deemed complete. Now, it is not approving the project. Those are two very different things. And so this deemed complete, while it is an important milestone in the development process, it does not mean that we have an approved project. I want to make sure I underline that. All right. The next step is actually more on the jurisdiction shoulders than on the developers, and that is to basically go through this application and determine whether or not they're going to approve it. And a lot of jurisdictions have state regulations that regulate how long they can spend on a project before they make their decision. And in most markets that we've worked in the past, most jurisdictions have, by law, a limit of 120 days to render their decision. So that's that 120 days here. And basically, they're getting to where they take the land use application and they approve it. And that is, in a lot of markets, we call that the preliminary plat approval. Some people will also call it entitlements. So that's 120 days. The next step is once we have this preliminary plat approval, the developer will then have his engineer get started on what we often call the civil engineering, or AKA construction drawings. And those construction drawings typically will take around, anywhere from 30 to 90 days. And so we'll just call it 60 days here in this example. And it is just another step that the developer has to take. Once he gets his preliminary plat approval, he will then have his engineers start to prepare the civil engineering. And once they get done preparing that, they then submit that again to the same jurisdiction for review and eventual approval. And this leads us kind of to what is our final step, and that is this construction drawing approval. And basically, this is where the jurisdiction is taking a look at the construction drawings that were submitted by the developer's engineering firm, and they are going over it, and oftentimes they'll do some red lines on it. They'll send it back to the engineering firm. The engineering firm will make some adjustments. They'll send it back to the jurisdiction, and they'll go back and forth a few times. And over the span of what we commonly see, anywhere from again, 60 to 120 days, we call it 90 days here in this example, the project will receive its construction drawing approval. And this is a very big milestone for any developer, because this is the milestone at which basically the developer he has all of his approvals, and all he needs to do now is pull his permits, and he can start moving dirt. He can start bringing out the heavy machinery. The project is what we oftentimes call in the industry shovel ready, meaning that we can now take this piece of raw dirt and we can start to subdivide it. We can bring out the machines and put in the roads, and put in the sidewalks and the planter strips and the stormwater detention ponds and all of that. We can start actually physically building this thing out. So that is a typical residential development timeline. And what you'll see here is that if we add all these up, it comes out to be right at 15 months. And so one thing that we've learned from this is that to get a project from the raw dirt stage all the way to construction drawing approval, to the point where we can actually go out and start pushing dirt and building this thing out, as I try to get these arrows nice and lined up with my OCD. It takes about 15 months. And this is a really important thing, especially in this current time that we're living through, these interesting times of COVID-19 and this virus that's going around, and everyone's wondering, how long is it going to last? I know as of this morning, the hope that it would be finished by Easter is pretty much out the door. Now people are saying, well, okay, end of April, hopefully by May 1, we start to see a flattening of the curve. But this is an important thing to understand, because in a developer's mind, in a developer's eyes, a piece of raw dirt that he looks at now today, well, he's not even going to start constructing that thing until at least 15 months down the road. And again, in some projects, that can be even longer. And so it's, I think, a good exercise to take a look at or to get into the mindset of a developer and to understand that developers are not thinking about Easter or they're not thinking about May 1st when they're looking at a project. They're looking at the next year or the year after that. And so their vision goes out much further than 15 to 30 days down the road. And that should be hopefully an encouragement to you guys that are thinking about getting into this land space, in that, yes, we are living through a very difficult and a very serious time right now, but uh, I think most people will agree that everyone's hope is to have the situation resolved in the coming months, if not weeks. And so, at least until things started back up again. But for a developer, when a developer is looking at their projects, today he might be looking at a piece of raw dirt, but he's not thinking about 15 days from now or 30 days from now. He is thinking all the way 15, 20 months, 24 months down the road. And so developers have a little bit of a different vision on projects than maybe someone wanting to sell their house. And they're thinking, well, I usually will get it closed in the next 45 to 60 days once I find a buyer. So let that be an encouragement to you that developers aren't thinking so much in the next 2 weeks or the next 4 weeks. They are thinking much further down the line. And with the strategies that we teach you how, not only how to understand the intricacies of this process, but also how to put these projects together and yet exit out of these projects prior to closing, which typically occurs sometime in this area here. And so as we put these projects together here today, as we head into the month of April, well, a developer that looks at a project here today is not thinking about Easter or about 4 weeks down the road. He's thinking about this 15, 20, 24 months down the road. So there you go, guys. Just a little bit of an education on the typical residential development timeline. And obviously, if you'd like to learn more about what we do and the strategies that we employ, we have a video, a presentation video that you can catch. That is at vestrite.com/action. And in that presentation video, we walk you through a little bit about what this timeline looks like, but also kind of how the strategy works, how the method works, how the blueprint that we teach in our course works. And it really is a fantastic way to be able to get involved in the development space, but avoid some of the big risks that developers take, namely in buying land and taking out multi-million dollar construction loans to build these things out. So it's a really great way to build wealth. And if it's something that you're interested in, definitely check out that video. And after the end of watching that video, if you'd like to get more information, you can book a strategy call with us. Hop on the phone with us. The call is absolutely free. We walk you through what the program is. We find out what you're after, what you're trying to accomplish, and if it works, if it's a good fit, we will invite you into the program. All right, guys, I'll end it here. Stay safe, be well, and we'll catch you in the next one. Take care.